Exodus, and I'm going to pick up on a tabernacle. I think it's an important principle that we're going to learn today. The reality is the message for today would probably fit really, really well if we did a stewardship month, a stewardship campaign. The focus is giving, and I think I've titled it actually, Giving Till No More Is Needed. And if you've got a mom, your moms give and give and give and give. The problem is moms are human. And moms run out of the ability to give anymore after a while. But that's not always what God calls us to do. He calls us to give till there's nothing left to give, until there's no more need, if you will. And I don't know what's happened to all my notes. My notes just vanished here for some reason. I have no idea the joys of technical. Jack, I'm going to have to start printing these notes out, so I'm going to have to do.
I never lose mine.
Jack never loses his. Mine just vanished for some reason. I don't know why that is. And I thought I had saved it. I had looked at it. I said, it's all here. I'm in good shape. And now it's gone. So we'll just, I know where I'm going mostly, so hopefully some of my quotes will figure them out as we go here. But we're going to be in Exodus, and the truth is we should start way back at the very beginning of the Scriptures, because God's method was He created everything. And at the end of His creation, He said it is good, it is very good. And then God laid down one rule. Don't eat of the one tree that's in the midst of the garden. And man blew it. One tree. You got all this provided for you in abundance, and you go to the one tree you're not supposed to go to because, well, that looks better than what God told us it was going to look like. I don't know what they were thinking. I have no idea. So God calls, ultimately, He calls for a sacrifice, and the sacrifice was some kind of an animal that provided skins to clothe Adam and Eve there in the garden. And God pronounced a judgment upon them, but He also pronounced a blessing on all mankind. And the blessing of all mankind was Jesus Christ. And what we're going to find as we look into the sacrifices and we look into this place called the Tabernacle, we're going to find some pictures there of who Jesus Christ is. And as I've been reading through the book of Exodus once again, and becoming familiar with this, I'm also becoming very familiar with some notes that my wife's grandfather gave me shortly after my ordination, because I said, I want your notes on your Tabernacle series. And were we in Scotland already when he mailed that to me? Or that was before we actually left, I think. But he sent me a whole bunch of stuff on the Tabernacle. And one of the things he shared with me was that salvation is free. But we will spend the rest of our lives finding out how costly that salvation is. And as I read his notes, and I probably say, Jesse, go get them off my desk, but I'll do that. I'll read it for you directly next week. I had it in these. I just throw this thing away for today because it's completely useless as a sign. My notes ran out before I even got started. Gotta love it. It's been one of those weeks. But it's brought me, as I thought about Grandpa, and I thought about the legacy that he left to myself and to my family and to the entirety of his family. I remember we met in Arkansas as one of his last events. And I remember somebody saying, well, Grandpa, what's the secret to living the Christian life? And I'm going to get real emotional thinking about this, because he grabbed his Bible, put his Bible under his arm, and he said, this book will give you everything you need to know to follow God. Because as we read this book, we find out how expensive our salvation is. We've been working through it in Hebrews in our Sunday school Bible study time. And Jesus is that better than. And the reference is to the tabernacle that was in the wilderness. And so if we get to Exodus, and I'm not even going to try to start at 25 and get all the way through chapter 40 today, for which you will be glad. But the story of the tabernacle starts with Moses visiting God on Mount Sinai. And he goes up there, and he's up there. God gives him this layout of this tabernacle that he's supposed to build. We're going to be reviewing some of the items. I'm not going to do a 2-year study on the tabernacle, but it'd be easy to do. Because there's so much in this, there's so much richness here. In the midst of it, Moses is up on the mount. He's up there for 40 days, 40 nights. The people down below, they go, "Oh, Moses, you've disappeared. What are we going to do?" And so they go to Aaron, because Aaron's the high priest, right? Aaron is the priest that was before them. Aaron represented God in Moses' absence. And they come to Aaron and they say, "Aaron, your brother has deserted us. He's been up there a long time. And all we're seeing is lightnings and thunderings and rumblings and things going on coming down from up there. But Moses hasn't come back. What are we going to do? How are we supposed to survive this without Moses? Aaron, you're the man. Step up and do your job." And Aaron collected an offering. And they brought their earrings, and they brought their junk, and they brought their gold and all this stuff. And Aaron's excuse when Moses came back down, he said, "Oh, I just threw all this stuff into the fire, and out came this golden calf." "Yep, we believe you." That's not the way melted gold works. We're going to see how God shapes the gold and the purposes for which he shapes the gold in his purpose, in his tabernacle. And Moses comes down, he breaks the tablets of stone. There's a riotous, raucous, I'll just use the word orgy, but I won't go any further than that, going on down there, worshiping this golden calf. And God is mad. Moses is mad. God threatens to wipe out the nation of Israel. And Moses, in his head, he's saying, "God's given me the 10 Commandments. He's given me the basis of the law. He's given me this model for the tabernacle. What am I going to do with this rabble-rousing people that don't even know how to trust God long enough? Can't even trust him for 40 days and 40 nights while I'm up on Sinai." How bad is that? At another point, Moses comes down off the Mount of Sinai. It says that he was with God, in the presence of God. He told God, asked God, "God, show me your glory." God covered him in the cleft of the rock. And as he was there, he absorbed the glory of God. He came off the mountain, said that he had to veil himself because the glory of God was so infused into his system and into his physical body that people couldn't stand to look at him. And Moses didn't even know it. It's a beautiful story. We're going to look at some of that in the weeks to come, but I'm going to go not quite to the end, but almost. We're going to pick up in chapter 35, if you will. We're going to start in verse 20. I'm going to read a few things. I'm going to skip a lot, so I'm going to encourage you, as I have been doing a lot of lately, dig in your Bible and read the story for yourself. Right? Because if I was to take every verse and work through every verse as I would be tempted to do, we would be here till about 7 o'clock tonight, and I would just barely be getting started, all right? But the tabernacle is this place, as we know, as we've been talking about, the tabernacle is a place of meeting with God. And we're going to see as we unfold this over the coming weeks of how important this place was in the nation of Israel. But I want us to keep in mind this is a temporary abode of God. This is just temporary. They have the tabernacle in the wilderness. This tabernacle was a portable sort of setup. They could take it down and put it back up in a new place in just a matter of a few hours. But it was the center of the camp. It was the center of the nation. It was a place that the Shekinah of God showed up either in a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire, depending whether it was day or night. And if they knew, if they looked to the center of the camp and there was a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, they knew God was in their midst. And they also knew if that thing started moving, it was time to pack their own tents and pack everything up and load up and follow the cloud cloud, follow the fire wherever it went. And in the middle of the night, can you imagine in the middle of the night, you're sleeping, and all of a sudden somebody says, "Oh, the fire's moving, we got to pack up and go." God, do you realize it's 2:30 in the morning? What are you thinking? God says, "I don't care what you think I'm thinking. I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm God." But the tabernacle was temporary, both in its placement and in its place, the fact that God did not abide there permanently. We then come to the temple that Solomon built in all of its majesty and all of its glory. Queen of Sheba came and she says, "I've seen the temple, I've seen the dwelling place of your God. And in seeing it, I realize that I have not seen half of how good God has been to you." The temple was magnificent. In Ezra, we see that the old men cried when they saw the rebuilt temple because it did not measure up to the glory of Solomon's temple. But it was temporary. Even the temple itself, which was dedicated as a place to God, was temporary. It had been destroyed by the Babylonians. It had been wiped out. They had taken everything. They had taken all the gold, all the precious, valuable stuff. Then Ezra brings some of it back and reestablishes worship in Jerusalem. Herod comes on the scene and he says, "Oh, I'm a rich Roman. I am going to be the blessing to the nation of Israel by building a new temple." I think if I remember right, it took 43 years to build the new temple. Is that right, Dan? Do you remember? Put you on the spot. I think it was 43 years, or 42 years, something like that. Because Jesus says, "I will tear this temple down and I will rebuild it again in 3 days." And they said, "That's not the way it works. It's taken us all this time, and this Herod's temple was bigger than Solomon's. Probably still not quite as glorious." But again, we see in 70 AD, this temple was destroyed. So we go to Corinthians, and if my brain had worked better, I would have had my notes handy, and I would have taken you right to the right text. But there's a reminder in Corinthians that our body, this physical carcass, is the temple of God. Your bodies. Some days we don't take very good care of it, do we? Some days we got to work on it. I think, boy, I'm not even near Solomon's temple. I'm not Herod's temple. I'm not any kind of temple. But God says my body is the temple of God. My body is a dwelling place of God. If I have confessed Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, my body is a temple to God. But this body, fortunately, is only temporary. Someday, God is going to give me a resurrected, glorified body that is going to somehow last for all of eternity. I don't know how that works. Don't ask me. I don't know the physics of it. I don't know the biology of it. I just know that God promised it. But for now, this is God's temporary dwelling place until He gives me that resurrected, glorified body. The book of Revelation is filled with the descriptions of what heaven's going to be like. The eternal throne of God, that new heaven, the new earth, is the dwelling place of God for all of eternity. And we will bow down before Him, before the throne, and we will worship. That's why I say, worship is not just our singing, it's not just our reading, it's not just our offering. Our worship starts when our feet hit the floor after we wake up. And we shouldn't be stopping our worship until we close our eyes and pass out in our beds and sleep. No matter whether we're working, whether we're playing, whether we're doing whatever, it doesn't matter. It's all worship. That's what it's about. That's why the tabernacle, being the center of the camp, was so important. Because that physical reminder that God is amongst us. We take this building and we call it going to church. This building is a tool for us to use to worship God, to remind us of that physical presence of God. But God does not dwell in this place alone except through us as His church. The church is the people. But we need this place to remind us that we are to worship God, that we are to trust Him, that God is in our midst. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there am I in their midst. This glory of it, and the tabernacle was to be built amongst them. But before they could build it, they had to have the stuff to build it, right? If you plan to build something and you don't have the finances for it, you don't have the materials for it, you don't have the things to get you the job done, what happens? You get started and then nothing finishes. Ruth and I bought an old pub and hotel over in Scotland, and I was determined I was not going to go into debt to do any of the work. And so here, 16 years later, 17, 18 years later, that building never got finished because I didn't have enough money to get it all done. That is the challenge for us as we plan ahead. But God had a plan for his people. Last week we talked about Passover. We talked about the nation of Israel coming out of Egypt, being cast out, put out of Egypt. But before they left, God said, go and talk to your neighbors, and you will have favor in their eyes, and they're going to give you everything you ever could have imagined. They got 400 years of slavery, reparations, if you will, for the work that they had done for all those years. God said that the Egyptians gave to them generously, liberally, and they walked out of that country, cast out of that country, if you will, very, very wealthy as a people. Enough that they just pulled their earrings off and had enough earrings to build that golden calf. But now God says that golden calf was a farce. Now let's talk about real worship. Let's talk about my presence in your midst. And so we come to chapter 35 in the book of Exodus. You'll join me there. We'll go back to chapter 25 next week. But this week I want us to see what it takes to give as unto the Lord. So verse 4, verse 1, it says, Moses gathered all the congregation of the children of Israel together and said to them, these are the words which the Lord has commanded you to do. This is our task. And Moses had already laid that out. We're going to look at that as we go here. But it comes to this point, it says, and Moses spoke, verse 4, and Moses spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded, saying, take from among you an offering to the Lord, whoever is of a willing heart. This is our challenge. If we're going to be God's people, and God is going to dwell in our midst, we have to have willing hearts. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm going to reach in my pocket and I'm going to give whatever God puts in my pocket today. Well, my pocket's empty today. There's not much there. But what do I have to give? And if I have something, am I willing to give? And my challenge to you is, as Paul reminds the New Testament church, he says to them, they did not give as we had hoped, because he's trying to take up an offering for the church in Jerusalem. He says, we went to the church at Galatia, which was a poverty-stricken church. And he says the problem was they did not give. He's right into the church at Corinth here, a very wealthy church. And he says, here's this church in Galatia. He said, they did not give as we had hoped. But he said they gave themselves first. And then they gave an offering. And this is what is taking place here in Exodus. It says that God said, give everyone whose spirit was willing. That's our first step. If we're going to give to God, we have to have a willing heart. We have to be there saying, God, here I am, and I am willing to give you what you ask for. Because if we don't give out of a willing heart, we're just giving grudgingly and of necessity, right? But the most important thing is we give ourselves. We come to that place where salvation is real and genuine and matters for our lives. Then we give of our service to the Lord, and then we give of what God has given to us. And understand this, God never expects you to give something He does not give you in the first place. That's an old cliche. I've heard that probably my entire life, but it's true. The reality is, if God wants something from you, He gives it to you. If He wants stuff, He gives you stuff so you can give it back to Him. If He wants your life, He says, I give you breath so that you can give your breath back to me in the way that you live. I want you to have a willing heart. And now here's what happens. It says, and they brought the Lord's offering for the work of the tabernacle of meeting, for all its service, and for the holy garments. They laid out what he wanted for them to give. We're going to see that here in a little bit as well. Verse 22, they came, both men and women. Now we're blessed in this church. We got a lot of men in here. We got a lot of future men here. That's even better. But the point of it is, the men came, and we're blessed, as I say, to have men. I've been in churches where I was the only man a few times. That's a scary place to be. But it says they came, both men and women. Churches do not survive without women. Moms, ladies that are not moms, but maybe anticipate that someday, you're important. There is no difference. Ladies, you have a role in the church that God ordained for you, and church cannot get by without it. It's that simple. Got to have it. Men and women. We need both. It's a doing of it. And as many as had a willing heart. Now that must mean the young people. I don't know. That's men and women. That's got to be adults, right? Yeah? Nod your head. Okay, there you go. All right. So the others with willing hearts must be youngers who don't consider themselves men or women yet. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but the point is they had a willing heart. Re-emphasizes that willing heart. And they brought earrings and nose rings. Okay, so I guess I can't preach against nose rings, except to take them out and give them into the offering. All right. Anyway, rings. Yeah. They would like my big old ring, because I got big fingers, so my ring's bigger than most people's. Rings and necklaces and all jewelry of gold. That is, every man made an offering of gold to the Lord. The stuff that God had given them when they left Egypt, they gave. Now, I want us to go back just one little bit here, because what did they give? They came, both men and women, and they brought. But it was what? They brought the Lord's offering. They didn't bring their offering, they brought the Lord's offering. They brought above and beyond what was expected. All right? And so they made this offering of gold to the Lord. Not to Moses, not to Aaron, but they gave it to the Lord. That's what we're supposed to do with our lives, with our time, our talents, and our treasure. We give it as unto the Lord. You don't give it to me. You don't give it to Martin and Jack as the deacons. You give it to the Lord. We've got work to do. We've got jobs to do. There are things that need to be accomplished. We give as unto the Lord, not as unto the church, but as unto the Lord. That is crucial for us. Now, we're going to skip way down through this, because he describes in verse 23 and 24 and a few other verses there of what they brought. But we'll see that again here in this next section as well. So let's jump all the way to 36. We'll come back and revisit some of the middle of this another time, but I want us to see where they came. So they're putting this stuff together. There's these craftsmen that have been assigned, this is your task. Take this stuff now and put it together for the purpose of building the tabernacle. We need all this stuff. We're going to talk about the different things that they built in coming weeks. Verse 5, it says, and they spoke to Moses, these craftsmen that were doing all this work. They come and they spoke to Moses, saying, the people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do. Now, I have never heard a preacher yet stand up and say, quit giving to the offering, quit giving to the Lord, because we've got everything done. We've accomplished every purpose you can imagine. And I got to look at my own life, and some people have accused me of sacrificing my life for the sake of the gospel. And I go, you have no idea how little I sacrifice. Because my one goal in life is to say, here's Jesus. I was talking to a guy the other day that was talking about retirement. I said, I don't think I'll ever retire. My prayer is, I'm an old man someday. I know some of you think I'm already old, but that's a different story for a different day. But the point of it is, I said, I hope someday I'm an old man. And I got to hobble up to the pulpit, and I preach my heart out. I go home for Sunday lunch, I eat my Sunday lunch, I sit down in the recliner, and that's the end of my life. I preach, here's Jesus. I think of my ordination, back to Grandpa. That old man was a blessing, 90 years old, when he came and preached my ordination. Now, Grandpa was a big man. He was my size, only a little bit even bigger. That fair assessment? So Grandpa wasn't one you wanted to mess with. Grandpa was Grandpa. When he came to our church when I was a senior in high school, I had been introduced to Mrs. Grandma and Grandpa Curtis. That's all I knew about. Grandpa came walking up the stairs on a Sunday morning, and I went, "Grandpa! Oh man, it's so good to see you here. You won't believe it. We got a guy by the name of Evangelist Charles Curtis that's coming to our church today that's going to be preaching for us." And he looks at me and says, "John, I am Evangelist Charles Curtis." He was Grandpa. We think, we're not sure, but we think from his stories that he's told, he has been in this church when it was up in the old church and did a crusade thing here at Evangelism Journeys. How many years ago that was, I couldn't tell you. We'll ask him when we get to heaven to clarify. But we think he's been here to Sea Lake. We know he's been to Sea Lake. He did mention that specifically, because that was after Jack and Laura got married 40 years ago. He said, "Oh, I've been there." So it was more than 40 years ago when he was here. But I remember talking to him and visiting with him, and then it came time. I loved Grandpa so much. When it was time for my ordination, I said, "Grandpa, will you preach my ordination?" Well, he drove all the way from Wisconsin with my mother and father-in-law, drove all the way down to Waxahachie, Texas. And he was tired. He was exhausted. He got in the front door, found the most comfy chair in the whole living room, and he sat down there and fell asleep. We woke him up so he could eat dinner, and then he fell asleep. We woke him up so that he'd go back to the hotel to go to sleep. Saturday was finished. He probably slept through most of that, if I remember right. Sunday came. He came to the house for breakfast, and then we went to church. I think he dozed off in the Sunday morning service. He was tired. And then it came time for the ordination thing. And Grandpa is hobbling up onto the platform with his walking stick. And he gets up on the pulpit and up to the platform and sits down in the chair and kind of slumps down. And I'm thinking, "John, what were you thinking asking this old man to come preach? What was wrong with you?" Well, it came time for him to do his part. He gets up out of the chair, he's over here, he's sitting down, and he stands up and stick in hand and kind of hobbles over to the pulpit. And he leans his pulpit, kind of slams it into the edge of the pulpit there, his walking stick, and he stands up straight. And he looks at me, because I'm sitting over here, and he says, "You, young man, get your chair right here. I'm preaching to you today." I don't remember a word he said. I just remember that old man had the power of God. Because he had learned, I can get everything I need from God right here. And what I have been given by God, I'm going to give out for the rest of my life, whatever it takes. Salvation is free, but you'll spend the rest of your life coming to grips with how expensive that salvation was. And that's what happened here. They gave everything they had, so much so that they're going, "Moses, tell the people to stop giving because we have enough." I'm not sure what enough looks like in our era, but we are temples of God. We are the tabernacle, the dwelling place of God, and God says if you want to make it work, you have to give everything you have to me. And I will guarantee you, I have not even come close. I will also guarantee you, you have not even come close. What does God require of us? I don't know. I don't really care. I just know I want to keep learning what that looks like so that someday somebody might say, you know, John actually sacrificed for the Lord. Maybe I'll believe it, but I doubt it. But I want to give more to God than what the average person does. Because here's what it says. They spoke to Moses, saying, the people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do. So Moses gave a commandment, they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, let neither man nor woman do any more work for the offering of the sanctuary. And the people were restrained from bringing, for the material they had was sufficient for all the work to be done. And indeed, it was too much. All I can say with that is, if only our testimony would be, we have given enough to do the work that God has called us. But folks, we've reached this part of the world that we sing this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine all over Sealy. I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. It makes a difference in this community. We haven't given it all, have we? So where do we go with that? You'll have to examine your own life. You'll have to examine your own heart. All I know is no matter where we go, we need Jesus. Whether it's in Scotland, in Sealy,